It was yes, senor, to hell.
I said you are black. I'm red.
They promised escape, laughter, and stardom, then vanished like static between channels, buried in a decade we thought we remembered. What really happened to the shows that America once welcomed into its living rooms, only to abandon without a trace? There are flops, and then there are disasters so extravagant that they seem to take a whole network down with them. Supertrain was NBC's attempt to build a blockbuster series around the concept of a futuristic, nuclear-powered luxury train. Think The Love Boat, but with wheels and none of the charm. It had all the ingredients of a hit, a massive budget, a unique setting, and plenty of hype. But something was off from the very beginning. The stories were thin, the characters forgettable, and the tone so inconsistent it gave viewers whiplash. Each episode felt like it was searching for its identity, wavering between drama, mystery, and comedy, but mastering none. The train itself, a giant, expensive model, was more impressive than anything the writers came up with. Behind the scenes, the budget spiraled out of control. It became the most expensive television series ever made at the time, but no amount of money could fix the fact that nobody cared about the people on board. The ratings crashed almost immediately. Critics savaged it. The audience, confused and underwhelmed, simply walked away. NBC tried to retool it. New characters, a shift in tone, but it was too late. Supertrain lasted only 9 episodes before it was quietly canceled. Today, it lives on as one of the most iconic failures in television history. A lavish machine with nowhere to go and no one left to watch it roll by. A beautiful wreck on the tracks of what might have been. What happens when a television show pushes the boundaries so far that it disappears before anyone can even finish watching it? That is exactly what happened with Turn On, a sketch comedy experiment that went down in history for being canceled mid-broadcast. Designed to be cutting-edge and experimental, it was supposed to capture the wild, liberated spirit of the late 1960s. But what it delivered was an avalanche of rapid-fire, computer-paced sketches with no host, no breaks, and no laughs. Its minimalist set and jarring edits made viewers feel like they were trapped in a sterile, alien world. Jokes flew by so quickly and with such little coherence that audiences could barely understand them, let alone enjoy them. Affiliates were horrified. Several stations pulled the plug before the first episode ended. Sponsors backed out almost immediately. Viewer complaints flooded in, not just about the show's content, but about its tone, cold, clinical, and deeply unsettling. In a world still warmed by The Carol Burnett Show and the comforting rhythm of variety television, Turn On felt like a slap to the face. The backlash was swift, and the show was pulled before a second episode could air. Some viewers today see it as misunderstood, even ahead of its time. One episode. That is all it took to become a television ghost story. It is not just forgotten, it is buried, a broadcast that collapsed in real time. There was a time when the Starlost was supposed to be a game changer, a Canadian-American science fiction epic created by legendary author Harlan Ellison. It promised something rare for television in the early 1970s, a deep, thoughtful exploration of humanity's future. The premise was solid. Earth had been destroyed. The last of humanity lived aboard a gigantic space ark, divided into sealed biospheres, each preserving a different culture. But the execution? That was another story entirely. Everything that could go wrong did. The budget was slashed early in production. Sets were cheap, effects were amateurish, dialogue dragged on endlessly, and characters stumbled through episodes that felt like half-finished thoughts. Ellison was so disillusioned he removed his name from the credits. What was meant to be a rich, compelling universe became a series of dimly lit rooms filled with awkward pacing and empty revelations. Viewers who tuned in expecting the next Star Trek found themselves stranded in a slow-moving dream where nothing ever really happened. Ratings fell, critics turned cold, and by the end of its short run, just 16 episodes, the Starlost had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that big ideas are not enough without the tools to bring them to life. It remains a fascinating failure. It is the kind of show that leaves behind more questions than answers, and perhaps that is why some still seek it out today. Not to enjoy it, but to witness the fall of something that could have been great, a star that never quite made it into orbit. Sometimes even the most absurd ideas make it to air. Holmes and Yo-Yo was one of those shows, a buddy cop sitcom with a twist, the twist being that one of the detectives was a robot. Not just any robot, but one who constantly malfunctioned in ridiculous ways. He printed arrest reports from his chest. He beeped when nervous. He got magnetized at crime scenes and once even had a phone ring inside his stomach. It was meant to be charming, quirky, maybe even futuristic. But what viewers got was a surreal nightmare in sitcom form. The jokes were so forced they felt like they had been written by a machine, too. There was no rhythm, no warmth, and no real chemistry between the human and the android. Critics called it embarrassing. Audiences were baffled. And while children might have giggled at the silly gadgets, most adults changed the channel in quiet disbelief. Behind the scenes, there was desperation. The creators tried to patch things up, sharpen the humor, humanize the robot. But it was too late. The show aired just 13 episodes before it was pulled from the schedule. It left behind almost no cultural footprint. It is hard to believe it existed at all, but that is what makes it unforgettable in all the wrong ways. This was not just a flop. It was a marathon of flops stretched over a single disastrous season. The Trouble with Tracy aired in Canada, but made its way to the United States through syndication, where its legacy of failure quickly spread. The show was an attempt to create a daily sitcom, airing 5 days a week, modeled after successful American family comedies. But the pressure to churn out 130 episodes in a single year proved too much for its creators. Sets were reused until they literally fell apart. Scripts were recycled from old radio plays. Actors were given one take. Sometimes, if something went wrong, it simply stayed in the episode. Scenes with boom mics in frame, flubbed lines, dead silence where laughter should have been. It became less of a show and more of an endurance test, and yet people watched. Some because it was the only thing on, others out of sheer fascination. The show had a strange, chaotic charm, like watching live theater while the stage crumbles underfoot. Critics called it the worst sitcom ever made. Viewers did not necessarily disagree. But something about Tracy, her over-the-top optimism, the show's desperate energy, made it linger in memory. It is studied now not for its success, but for its sheer audacity. A reminder that television is sometimes powered more by deadlines than inspiration. And when that happens, you get a show that feels like it is held together with tape and panic. The Trouble with Tracy was a mess, but it was a glorious, relentless mess, the kind you cannot look away from. Sometimes even science fiction needs a laugh, but Quark never quite found its punchline. This short-lived series tried to parody the genre just as Star Wars fever was gripping the world. It followed a garbage collector in space, Adam Quark, and his bizarre crew aboard a sanitation ship cleaning up interstellar waste. There were clones, robots, alien princesses, and lots of fourth-wall-breaking one-liners. The tone was weird, the jokes even weirder. Creator Buck Henry had helped launch Saturday Night Live, and there was hope he could bottle that same absurd genius for network television. But what worked in sketch form did not always translate into 25-minute episodes. Quark constantly wavered between satire and silliness. It poked fun at Star Trek and science fiction cliches, but without much love or warmth for the material it mocked. Some gags were clever, others felt like leftovers. The laugh track made it worse, dulling any potential edge. Critics were puzzled. Audiences were indifferent. NBC shuffled its time slot, hoping something would stick. Nothing did. After just 8 episodes, the show was canceled. But for a brief moment, Quark had aimed for something unique, a space comedy before that was really a thing. And maybe that was the problem. It was ahead of its time, or maybe just off-key. Watching it now, you can see flashes of brilliance under the bad wigs and rubber aliens. But you can also feel the weight of a show that never figured out how to balance satire with storytelling. Quark vanished almost as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind only static in the void. "You're under arrest, sugar." That was the catchphrase that made America sit up and take notice, if only briefly. Get Christy Love was revolutionary in its time, featuring one of television's first black female leads in a crime drama. Teresa Graves starred as Christy Love, an undercover detective in a world that was still figuring out how to talk about race, power, and gender. She was smart, tough, stylish, and unforgettable. The show was based loosely on a made-for-television movie, which drew major buzz. ABC thought they had the next big hit on their hands, and for a moment, it seemed like they did. But then the cracks began to show. The scripts were formulaic, the action routine, and the production values limited. Christy Love was meant to be bold, but the stories rarely let her break out of tired cliches. Behind the scenes, Graves, who had converted to a religious faith, refused to participate in any scenes she felt were too violent or provocative. Creative clashes followed. The network struggled to find the right tone. Ratings dipped, and by the end of its first season, the show was gone. What should have been a trailblazer was reduced to a footnote. Still, Christy Love carved out a place in history. She opened a door that had been shut for too long, even if she did not get to walk all the way through it. Today, she is remembered more for what she represented than for the plots she solved. A symbol of potential unrealized, a legend born from a show that never had the chance to grow. You would think that turning one of the most successful comedies of all time into a television show would be a sure thing. But Delta House proved just how quickly lightning can escape the bottle. Based on the hit movie Animal House, this series tried to translate the chaos, raunch, and rebellion of the big screen into a weekly sitcom, only now under the watchful eye of network censors. And it showed. Gone were the wild parties, the edge, and the sense of danger. What remained was a watered-down echo of what once made people howl with laughter. Some of the original cast returned, including John Vernon as the uptight Dean Wormer, but without John Belushi's magnetic presence, the show felt like a tribute act. The humor was neutered. The stories went nowhere. ABC hoped that the mere association with the movie would be enough to draw in fans, but those fans were not fooled. This was not the Animal House they remembered. Ratings started strong but fell quickly. The characters, once riotous and wild, now felt flat and safe. Within 13 episodes, the show was off the air. Critics called it forgettable. Even the network seemed eager to move on. Delta House became another example of how television sometimes strangles the very spirit it hopes to bottle. You cannot fake irreverence, and you definitely cannot sanitize rebellion. Today, it is a curiosity, remembered mostly by die-hard fans and trivia buffs. A show that tried to cash in on chaos and wound up lost in the quiet. It was a sitcom with bark, but no bite. Mgherk. A Dog's Life featured actors in full-body dog costumes, playing a family of suburban canines navigating everyday problems like job interviews, neighborhood feuds, and raising puppies. Yes, really. It sounds like a bizarre fever dream, and watching it felt even stranger. The actors, muffled by their rubber dog heads, delivered dialogue through stiff movements and awkward lip-syncing. The humor relied on canine puns and human situations made weirder by the fact that everyone was dressed like a golden retriever. The show's premise was never fully explained. Were these dogs living in a world of humans? Were they symbolic? Satirical? No one knew, and that uncertainty made it nearly impossible for viewers to connect. Audiences were bewildered, critics were harsh, even kids, who were assumed to be the target audience, seemed more confused than entertained. NBC hoped it would be a quirky, family-friendly hit, but Mgherk stumbled out of the gate. The novelty wore off fast. Once you got past the initial shock of talking dogs in business suits, there was not much left. No sharp writing, no emotional core, just a lot of wagging tails and sitcom tropes buried in fur. The show lasted only a handful of episodes before being quietly retired. Few mourned its passing. But in its own strange way, Mgherk has become a cult legend. Proof that in the 1970s, networks were willing to try anything, even a dog-suit sitcom. Today, it stands as one of the oddest experiments to ever grace prime time. A surreal reminder that television's strangest ideas sometimes make it all the way to air. The idea was magic. A group of travelers, scientists, teens, mystics, find themselves trapped in a mysterious dimension where time and reality break down. They search for a way home, journeying through a series of strange lands, each with its own rules, cultures, and dangers. That was The Fantastic Journey. A mix of science fiction and fantasy, it was a show that promised discovery, imagination, and adventure. But what it delivered was something far more chaotic. Despite an ambitious premise, the show was never given the time or budget it needed to build its world. Sets looked recycled. The effects were underwhelming. The writing swerved between philosophical and campy, often within the same episode. One week they were battling telepathic overlords, the next week they were navigating a land of forgotten civilizations. It felt like 3 different shows fighting for control. Characters were introduced and dropped. Storylines never paid off. Even the lead actor was changed mid-season. NBC had hoped for a ratings hit, but the show struggled to build a consistent audience. Viewers were intrigued but also confused. What was the journey, really? Where were they going? And why did it feel like the writers were just as lost as the characters? After only 10 episodes, The Fantastic Journey was canceled. But in those few hours, it captured something unique, a wild, unpolished attempt to blend science fiction with mythology and metaphysics. It did not succeed, but it did not completely fail either. For some, it still lingers as a vivid memory of what television used to try before it learned to play things safe. A weird, winding path through television's stranger corners. It had glitz, it had charm, and it had the Las Vegas Strip, but it never had the audience. Who's Watching the Kids was a sitcom that centered on 2 aspiring showgirls trying to make it big in Sin City while raising their younger siblings in the process. The idea alone seemed like a classic blend of heartfelt family drama and zany showbiz antics. It had neon, sequins, and sass, along with the tried-and-true formula of mismatched roommates balancing dreams and responsibility. But the series never found its footing. The humor felt thin. The stories leaned heavily on awkward misunderstandings and slapstick gags that even the laugh track could not salvage. The kids were mostly relegated to the background, and the adult characters lacked the warmth that audiences were used to from family-centric shows. NBC hoped it would capture the same lightning that made Laverne and Shirley a hit, especially since it came from the same producers. But it missed the heart, and it missed the timing. Audiences in the late 1970s were already shifting toward more grounded, character-driven sitcoms. The over-the-top Vegas flair and cartoonish setups just felt out of touch. Ratings declined quickly. After only 11 episodes, the show was quietly pulled. It has since faded into near-total obscurity. For a show that promised both showbiz sparkle and family tenderness, it managed to deliver neither. Watching it now feels like digging up a discarded script from a past that tried too hard to be funny without ever being real. A footnote in television history, barely remembered, but maybe, just maybe, that is for the best. Marty Feldman was impossible to forget. Those wide eyes, that surreal humor, that presence. Already a star in Britain, Feldman brought his signature style to American television in the Marty Feldman Comedy Machine. It was a sketch show that took absurdity seriously. The pace was fast, the visuals wild, and the tone unapologetically weird. Feldman was the kind of performer who could turn nonsense into poetry, if you were willing to go along for the ride. But American audiences in the early 1970s were not quite ready for it. The show was a whirlwind of bizarre sketches, musical numbers, and animated interludes. One moment he was impersonating a dictator in a tutu, the next he was playing chess with a chicken. It had more in common with Monty Python than with anything on American prime time. And that was the problem. The cultural gap was just a little too wide. Audiences were used to the familiar rhythm of variety shows, not the frenetic chaos of British surrealism. Viewers were confused, advertisers were wary, critics admired Feldman's genius, but questioned the format's accessibility. Despite strong backing and an ambitious slate of episodes, the comedy machine sputtered out after just one season. Feldman would go on to have success in films, especially with roles like Igor in Young Frankenstein. But this television experiment became more of a cult curiosity than a breakthrough. Today, it is a relic of creative risk, a show that swung for the fences and missed, but missed in a way that still dazzles. Not all brilliance lands. Sometimes it just flashes once and vanishes. It had the setting, it had the potential, it even made history. The Corner Bar was a sitcom set in a modest New York watering hole, a familiar formula with a twist. It featured one of the first recurring gay characters on American television. Peter Panama, played by Vincent Schiavelli, was quietly groundbreaking. But the show around him never quite matched the boldness of that casting. Week after week, it shuffled between quirky patrons, minor hijinks, and barroom chatter that often felt more like background noise than plot. ABC hoped it would be a hit in the style of Cheers, before Cheers existed. But the writing lacked the snap. The characters blurred together. The bar, instead of feeling lived in, felt like a stage set waiting for the real show to begin. Audiences did not connect, ratings dropped, the cast changed. The show was retooled for a second season with a new owner and different characters, but it still could not find its voice. After 2 brief seasons, it disappeared with little fanfare, and yet, for that one quiet step forward in representation, it remains part of television history. Not for being great, not even for being good, but for daring, however briefly, to show someone different. The Corner Bar might not have lasted, but it cracked the door open. That matters, even if everything else around it faded. It was bold, too bold maybe. Hot L Baltimore came from Norman Lear, the mastermind behind groundbreaking hits like All in the Family and Maude. Based on a stage play by Lanford Wilson, the show was set in a rundown hotel filled with outcasts, dreamers, and people society had quietly ignored. Prostitutes, illegal immigrants, transients, they all called the hotel home. And that was exactly the problem. In a time when primetime television was still finding its nerve, Hot IL Baltimore pushed the line so far forward that many stations refused to air it at all. The show tackled sex, poverty, racism, and identity, topics that were still taboo even by Lear's fearless standards. There was no laugh track to soften the edges, just conversations that felt uncomfortably real. Critics were split. Some praised it as raw and unflinching. Others found it too confrontational. And while Lear had managed to make controversy work in the past, this time the balance tipped. Viewers were unsure whether they were supposed to laugh, cry, or change the channel. Ratings were modest. Affiliate pushback was fierce. After just 13 episodes, ABC pulled the plug. Hot L Baltimore was gone. But it left a mark. It showed just how hard television had to fight to reflect real life, and how easy it was for something honest to be labeled too dangerous. Today, the show is rarely mentioned, but it remains a reminder that bravery on screen often pays the price first. He could vanish with the push of a button. Gemini Man was a science fiction action show with a simple hook. A secret agent gains the ability to become invisible for short bursts of time. It was fast, sleek, and full of potential. But it never clicked. The lead, Ben Murphy, played Agent Sam Casey, a motorcycle-riding, beach-loving secret operative with a wristwatch that turned him transparent. The effects for their time were impressive. The idea had bite, but the scripts did not. Each episode followed the same basic arc. Invisible Man solves the case, reappears in time to deliver a wisecrack, and rides off into the sunset. There was little depth, no character growth, and the concept, while flashy, wore thin quickly. NBC launched the show with fanfare, but audiences were not impressed. The mid-70s were filled with science fiction experiments, and Gemini Man got lost in the noise. Ratings dipped. Critics shrugged, and after 11 episodes, it disappeared just like its protagonist. A few episodes were later re-edited into a television movie, but the series never returned. Invisibility, it turns out, is not much of a superpower when it comes to storytelling. Gemini Man was slick, but shallow. It promised adventure and gave us repetition. Today, it is remembered mostly by collectors and curious fans of retro sci-fi. A show that had all the right gadgets, but none of the spark. Another forgotten ghost of the broadcast era, flickering in and out of memory. The concept was pure late 60s brilliance. A group of idealistic college students crash land on a mysterious island where the adult world no longer exists. No teachers, no parents, no government, just a blank slate to rebuild society from scratch. The new people was meant to be bold, a mirror held up to the counterculture generation. It blended themes of Lord of the Flies and Gilligan's Island, but with a serious tone and moral undertones. And yet, for all its ambition, the show never really worked. It aired on ABC as part of a half-hour drama experiment and never had time to breathe. Episodes felt rushed, ideas half-formed. The writing wrestled with big questions: freedom, power, equality, but the characters remained shallow and their struggles felt like debates rather than drama. The sets were plain, the stakes low. Viewers tuned in out of curiosity but quickly lost interest. Ratings sagged. The network gave it 17 episodes, but the cultural revolution it wanted to ignite never came. What should have been groundbreaking ended up feeling like a lecture. Even the cast, filled with fresh-faced newcomers, seemed lost in the tone shifts. There was potential in every frame, but no spark, no urgency, no heart. Today, The New People is more a forgotten experiment than a failure. One of those rare shows where the premise outshined every part of the execution. A utopia left unexplored. A generation's voice that never found the right words. What starts as a romantic gesture ends up as one of the strangest sitcoms ever aired on American television. The Ugliest Girl in Town followed an American man who, in a desperate attempt to stay close to a British woman he loved, disguised himself as a female fashion model and found unexpected success in London. That is the premise. And yes, it really aired in prime time. The show leaned heavily into slapstick humor and gender-bending gags that were already outdated before the first episode premiered. Audiences were confused. Critics were baffled. The series tried to be progressive, maybe even charming, but it landed squarely in the uncanny valley of cringe. The makeup and wigs were absurd, the character motivations paper-thin, and the tone all over the place. It neither respected nor understood the complexities of the themes it was playing with. And yet, ABC gave it 17 episodes, each one a surreal journey into a world where a man in a dress could somehow pass for a top model without anyone catching on. Viewers did not buy it. The laughs were forced, the cultural pushback quiet but firm. It was not offensive in the way some shows are, it was just tone-deaf. Oddly cheerful about a premise that probably should have stayed a sketch instead of a series. Over time, it became a punchline in retrospectives about misguided television decisions. It is rarely re-aired, and for good reason. Some shows are forgotten because they were ahead of their time. This one was forgotten because even in its own time, it felt completely out of place. There was a time when a television pitch like 5 fun-loving guys on a houseboat was enough to greenlight an entire series. That was the case with The San Pedro Beach Bums, a comedy about a group of carefree men navigating life, friendship, and misadventure from their floating home off the coast of Southern California. ABC hoped the easygoing vibe would charm audiences, offering something breezy and light in contrast to the heavier dramas of the time. But the result was a show that felt as aimless as its characters. The cast was likable, if underdeveloped. Each episode centered around antics that rarely built into anything memorable. Pranks, misunderstandings, and goofball schemes were the main menu items. It was a series that chased laughs without ever really earning them. The humor was broad, the stakes low. Even the location, a picturesque beach setting, felt underused. And with so many characters sharing the spotlight, no one truly stood out. Viewers tuned in expecting a blend of the Monkees and Happy Days. What they got was a sitcom without structure, floating from episode to episode without any clear direction. Critics called it lightweight and forgettable. Ratings were lukewarm. After just 10 episodes, the Bums were evicted from the network's lineup. The San Pedro Beach Bums became a footnote in ABC's late 70s programming, quickly buried under more successful shows that followed. It was not a disaster. It just never justified its existence. A sitcom that tried to coast on charm and ended up lost at sea. Chicago, the 1920s, gangsters, speakeasies. You would think that kind of setting would give birth to something gritty, stylish, and unforgettable. Instead, we got The Chicago Teddy Bears, a sitcom that took the world of prohibition and turned it into something utterly toothless. The show focused on a small-time tavern owner trying to stay afloat in a city teeming with organized crime, only none of it was ever scary or even remotely threatening. The tone was flat, the characters cartoonish, and the laughs minimal. It starred Dean Jones and John Banner, known for his role on Hogan's Heroes, but even their charm could not lift the show out of its weird identity crisis. Was it supposed to be satire? Farce? Historical comedy? No one seemed sure. The dialogue leaned heavily on outdated vaudeville routines, and every attempt at slapstick landed with a thud. The gangsters were more bumbling than menacing, and the plots felt stitched together from rejected drafts of better shows. CBS had hoped to capitalize on nostalgia for the Prohibition era, but viewers did not connect. Ratings were poor, critics were unimpressed, and after 13 episodes, the network pulled the plug. The Chicago Teddy Bears was quickly forgotten, overshadowed by bolder, smarter comedies that came later in the decade. It remains a curious misstep, proof that even an interesting setting and decent cast cannot save a show that never figures out what it wants to be. It had the costumes, the music, and the backdrop. What it lacked was a soul. It is rare for a television show to fail so quickly that it vanishes before audiences even have a chance to judge it, but the Tammy Grimes Show did just that. Premiering in the fall of 1966, it was meant to be a showcase for Broadway star Tammy Grimes. The premise was simple. She played a wealthy, impulsive heiress who constantly meddled in other people's lives, creating chaos with her charm and good intentions. But from the moment it aired, something felt off. The timing was wrong. The character too quirky. The writing not nearly strong enough to carry the weight of its star. Critics called it grating. Audiences were baffled. Within just 4 episodes, ABC canceled it, making it one of the shortest-lived network television shows of all time. So why is it remembered among 1970s flops? Because its failure echoed throughout the next decade as a warning. Networks became more cautious about building shows around untested stars, and even reruns rarely gave the Tammy Grimes Show a second life. It was buried so fast it almost became a myth, a phantom series whispered about by television historians. 4 episodes. That was all it took, and that was all it got. Rags to Riches was the kind of show that could only exist in a moment where the world still believed a musical number could solve every problem. Airing on NBC from 1987 to 1988, it was basically Annie Meets the Brady Bunch with a splash of grease, all set to the tune of early 60s rock and roll. The plot? A wealthy businessman randomly adopts 6 orphan girls and moves them into his mansion. Cue the family bonding. Cue the chaos. Cue the songs. Each episode followed a dramatic storyline, usually involving friendship, growing pains, or the threat of losing their new home. And every storyline came with at least 2 classic musical performances, except they didn't sing the originals. They rewrote the lyrics to fit the plot. So instead of singing "My Boyfriend's Back," they'd sing "My Sister's Mad," or something that somehow worked in a subplot about report cards. It sounds ridiculous, and maybe it was, but it also hit a sweet spot of television magic that made it perfect Sunday night comfort food. It only ran for 2 seasons, but it made a massive impact on the kids and families who tuned in. You'll find clips online now that feel like time capsules, all teased hair, neon tights, and hard-on-your-sleeve sincerity. Rags to Riches didn't care if you thought it was cheesy. That was the whole point. It was pure optimism, wrapped in a melody, just when people needed it most. If you grew up in the 1990s, this show was like the cool older cousin who always knew what was up, but still made time to help you with your homework. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper followed Mark Cooper, a former professional basketball player turned high school teacher who used humor, honesty, and a whole lot of heart to guide kids through school and life. Played by Mark Curry, he was the kind of teacher everyone wished they had. He cracked jokes but never dodged the real stuff. He called it like he saw it. He cared. But the show was not just about Cooper. It was about a house filled with friends, family, and the messy love that holds them together. Vanessa, his confident and hilarious roommate, brought sass and style. Geneva and young Nicole added warmth and relatability. They all lived together, stumbled together, and picked each other up when the world got rough. It felt like family, even if it was not traditional. What made Mr. Cooper stand out was how seamlessly it blended life lessons with laughs. It dealt with serious issues, peer pressure, racism, disappointment, without ever getting preachy. And it never forgot to have fun along the way. For 5 solid years, it was a staple of the family night lineup. Then it was gone, quietly shuffled off the schedule, with little fanfare and less reason. The reruns dried up. The impact did not. Hangin' with Mr. Cooper was one of the last sitcoms that felt like it cared about kids and adults at the same time. And for many of us, that kind of care was rare. Mike Vitar was the kind of kid who made every summer feel like it could last forever. As Benny the Jet Rodriguez in The Sandlot, he was a symbol of speed, freedom, and the unbreakable magic of childhood friendship. And in the Mighty Ducks sequels, he brought that same fire to the ice. He was not just playing characters, he was becoming memories, the kind that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. But somewhere between the bases and the blue lines, Mike disappeared. There was no farewell press tour, no dramatic scandal, just a quiet exit in the late 1990s, as if he had run the bases one last time and never looked back. While the world was still quoting his lines and wearing Sandlot t-shirts, Mike was stepping into a new uniform, one that would define the rest of his life. He became a firefighter, a real one, not a role, not a scene, a life-risking, people-saving, dawn-to-dusk kind of job. It is the kind of pivot that tells you something about who he truly was. Fame might have found him, but it never changed him. And while the industry kept calling, Mike had already answered a different kind of call. There is something poetic about that. A child star walking away not out of failure, but out of purpose. He did not want to be remembered. He wanted to matter. And maybe that is why his disappearance feels less like a loss and more like a story we were lucky to witness, even if only for a while. Because some heroes do not wear costumes on screen. Some wear helmets and carry hoses. The Texas Wheelers was a sitcom that aired for a blink in time, just 4 episodes in 1974 before it disappeared from the airwaves. It told the story of a widowed father, Zach Wheeler, played by Jack Elam, trying to raise his 4 kids in rural Texas after returning home. The tone was rough around the edges but warm at the core, an unusual blend of grit and sentiment. One of the kids was played by a young Mark Hamill just before the world would know him as Luke Skywalker. But even that bit of trivia was not enough to save the show. It premiered during a time when audiences were craving escapism, not slice-of-life realism wrapped in Southern grit. The laugh track felt out of place. The characters talked more than they joked. There was a quiet honesty in every scene, moments that felt like they came from someone's real life, not a writer's room. The show made no effort to dazzle or distract. It just wanted to sit with you and tell the truth. It was less about punchlines and more about pauses, silences, and hard-earned smiles. And instead of punchlines, there were long, quiet moments of reflection. Maybe too many. The Texas Wheelers did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it was honest. And in 1974, honest sitcoms did not get very far. But those who remember it remember something rare. A network show that tried to say something deeper under its dusty boots and denim jackets. It had an emotional backbone. It wanted to show how family bonds are messy, complicated, and not always tied together with a neat bow. Its cancellation felt like closing the book before the first chapter was over. Yet in those few episodes, there was something sincere, something that lingers, the kind of sincerity that could only be appreciated years later. It was one of those shows that should have faded into parody, but somehow carved out a place in America's living rooms, and never really left. The Beverly Hillbillies followed the Clampett family, simple folks from the Ozarks who struck oil and suddenly found themselves living in a Beverly Hills mansion they could not understand, surrounded by wealth they never asked for. The comedy was obvious, their backward ways clashing with the glittering absurdity of high society. But beneath the laughs was something quieter, something almost tragic. This was a story about people who never quite fit in, no matter how big their bank account got. Jed Clampett, the soft-spoken patriarch, always seemed like he was looking for something he had lost, even as the world laughed around him. Granny's wild wisdom and Ellie Mae's innocence made them caricatures on the surface, but real to anyone who knew what it meant to be treated like a joke just for being different. And America watched, week after week, because it reminded us that not every outsider is looking to blend in. But then, just like that, the Clampetts were gone. One day they were gracing prime time, the next they were a punchline, buried beneath newer shows with shinier backdrops and faster jokes. The laugh track stopped, and no one asked why. Today, the Beverly Hillbillies exists mostly in rerun limbo, a relic with a twang, treated like a fossil of a simpler time. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet, watching Granny try to make moonshine in a millionaire's kitchen, then you remember what television used to be. Odd, imperfect, human. And sometimes, that was exactly what made it so rich. Quinn Cummings was never the kind of child star who felt like a product. She was sharp, sincere, self-aware in a way that made her Oscar-nominated performance in The Goodbye Girl feel like more than just acting. It felt like truth. She was the clever kid who said what the adults were too afraid to, but even at her brightest, Quinn was already seeing through the glitter. She left acting before the industry could wear her down, before the roles dried up, before she became someone she did not recognize. Instead, she did something rare. She left on her own terms. Quinn became a writer, an entrepreneur, a commentator. Her essays cut like glass. Funny, brutally honest, always thoughtful. She spoke openly about the absurdities of fame, parenting, and growing up in a world obsessed with image. Her exit was not a mystery. It was a declaration that her identity was not tied to box office numbers or red carpets, that she could be more. And she was. She built a second career from intellect and integrity, not nostalgia. In a culture that often devours its young, Quinn Cummings walked away with her voice intact. And maybe that is the most powerful kind of disappearance, the one that becomes a transformation. She is not gone. She is just somewhere better, somewhere real. Baywatch Nights was a spin-off that should have never worked, and in the end, it didn't. Airing from 1995 to 1997, it began as a detective drama starring David Hasselhoff's character from Baywatch, now moonlighting as a private investigator. But somewhere along the way, someone had a wild idea. What if it was supernatural? By its second season, the show had shifted into full X-Files territory, with Hasselhoff chasing ghosts, sea monsters, and other unexplainable threats under the moonlight. The tone was bizarre. The writing even more so. And while Baywatch thrived on sun and surf, Baywatch Nights traded it for fog machines and fear. Audiences were baffled. There were alien conspiracies, demon possessions, and episodes that felt like fever dreams. It was less a spin-off and more a genre-bending experiment in identity crisis. But hidden inside that chaos was a wild kind of courage, to throw everything safe away and start again. The camp factor went through the roof, but without the self-awareness to pull it off. Still, it tried. It tried to be different, to evolve, to turn a sun-soaked brand into something shadowy and strange. But that leap was too big. Ratings plummeted, and by 1997, it was quietly canceled, swallowed by the very darkness it tried to explore. Today, it exists more as trivia than memory, A weird side note in the legacy of one of the most watched shows in television history. But there's something oddly admirable about it. It dared to transform, to chase the unknown. And even if it stumbled, it did so with conviction. Before nostalgia became an aesthetic, Margie brought it to life with pink wallpaper and cloche hats. Set in the roaring 20s but aired in the early 1960s, this sitcom was a charming, retro escape into a world that felt dreamlike, even to its original audience. Margie Clayton was the all-American girl, witty and wide-eyed, caught between homework and heartbreak. She lived in a time of flappers and prohibition, but her struggles felt familiar. Parents who didn't understand, boys who did not listen, friends who came and went. Every episode was like opening an old photo album, sepia-toned, soft around the edges, and a little too perfect to be real. That was the magic. The show was more than just a period piece. It was a bridge between generations. Adults saw their youth in it. Kids saw a version of growing up that felt both exciting and safe. But it did not last. 1 year. That was all Margie got. The network said the ratings were weak, but the truth is, Margie's quiet storytelling could not compete with louder, faster shows. And so it vanished, tucked into the drawer of television history like a love letter no one had the heart to throw away. Today, barely anyone remembers Margie. But if you do, you probably remember how she made you feel, like being young was something you never wanted to let go of. Per Sullivan was the kind of weird you wished you could be. As Dewey on Malcolm in the Middle, he stole every scene without ever trying. He was odd, unfiltered, a little too smart, and strangely wise beyond his years. You never quite knew what he would say next, and that was the charm. In a show packed with chaos and punchlines, Dewey was the quiet chaos, the unexpected storm. And then, just like that, Eric faded into the silence. When the series ended, so did his career. Not with a bang, but with an empty space where we thought he would be. There were no major interviews, no public breakdowns, just Eric disappearing into the backdrop of real life. He made a couple of small appearances in the early 2000s, but nothing that felt like a return. And after a certain point, the world stopped asking when we would see him again. Because deep down, we knew the answer. Rumors have swirled, speculation has followed, but Eric has never stepped back into the spotlight to explain. And maybe he does not owe us that. Maybe his silence is its own kind of message, that life does not always need to be performed, that not every story gets a sequel. Sometimes the curtain falls and the actor just walks away. But there is something haunting about it, something unfinished. Because Dewey was not just a character. He was a mirror to the strange, fragile, brilliant side of being a kid. And the boy behind him? He chose something that most child stars never get. Anonymity, peace, privacy, a life off stage. It's a Living had a simple premise. 6 waitresses working at a swanky restaurant on top of a Los Angeles skyscraper, juggling tips, tough customers, and each other. It ran for nearly a decade, first on ABC and then in syndication, from 1980 to 1989. But despite its long life, it somehow fell through the cracks of television history. Maybe it was because the cast changed more than once. Maybe it was because people did not know how to market a show that was about working women, but not as flashy as Charlie's Angels or as dramatic as Dynasty. It was funny, it was sharp, and it gave voice to the struggles of service workers in a way few sitcoms ever have. These were not rich characters. They were real. They clocked in tired, left exhausted, and still found reasons to laugh in between. Each joke landed because it came from a place of lived-in truth, not punchline formulas. The show was less about drama and more about dignity. They argued, supported each other, and occasionally broke down in the break room. The comedy came from the grind, the awkward tables, the demanding guests, the tired feet. And while it had plenty of laughs, it never made fun of their lives. It respected them. That quiet dignity is why It's a Living still resonates with the people who remember it. But syndication does strange things to memory. Shows become familiar, but fuzzy, important, but unspecific. It lived in reruns and then disappeared. And now, it is a name people say with a vague sense of recognition, like something they dreamed about once. But behind that name was something brave, something real, something that showed working women without glamour, but with grit. This show was the quiet heartbeat of many family evenings, the kind of series you watched with your parents while the dog curled up nearby and the world outside felt just a little less loud. Family Affair told the story of a wealthy bachelor, Bill Davis, who suddenly finds himself the guardian of 3 orphan children. But it was not just the storyline that pulled people in. It was the warm presence of Mr. French, the British butler, whose old world manners clashed with a new world household. Their dynamic was soft, graceful chaos, balancing the responsibility of raising children with the struggle to keep something as fragile as a family from falling apart. What made Family Affair hit so deeply was not drama. It was stillness. It was the quiet moments of Uncle Bill staring at the window after a long day, realizing his life was no longer his own. It was Buffy, clutching her beloved Mrs. Beasley doll like it was her only anchor. These were not just actors and characters. These were people we saw ourselves in. Then, slowly, they disappeared. Not canceled in scandal or drama, but phased out quietly, like a memory no one wanted to admit they had forgotten. Today, Family Affair is a ghost on television's timeline, almost too polite to fight for its place. But if you ever caught an episode, you knew it was never about the plot. It was about how it felt to be seen. Mara Wilson did not just play magical girls, she was one. To anyone growing up in the 90s, she was the bright-eyed child who brought life to characters we adored. Whether she was teaching a cruel headmistress a lesson in Matilda or navigating grief in Mrs. Doubtfire, Mara had a presence that was impossible to ignore. She had a warmth that could cut through any screen and land softly in your heart. And then, almost overnight, she was gone. Not fallen, not broken, just elsewhere. As it turns out, Hollywood was not the sanctuary it pretended to be. Mara's decision to leave was not sudden, but it was necessary. The industry that once celebrated her began to suffocate her. By the time she was a teenager, acting felt more like a performance off-screen than on. She was growing up in a space that did not allow her to grow. So she walked away. From the lights, the scripts, the expectations, and toward something truer. Mara became a writer, an advocate, a voice for children who never had one. She opened up about mental health, grief, and what it meant to be a child star when the cameras stopped rolling. And while we lost her as an actress, we gained her as a witness to a world most of us never see. The one behind the curtain, the one without the glitter. Her words became a new kind of performance, honest, brave, and often heartbreaking. Some child stars fade because the world forgets them. Mara chose to disappear because she remembered herself, and in doing so, she showed us that there is life after the applause ends, a life of purpose, of survival, of healing. That might be the greatest role she has ever played. Beauty and the Beast was a fairy tale set in a world of concrete and shadows. From 1987 to 1990, it told the story of Catherine, a lawyer in New York City, and Vincent, a noble beast living beneath the streets in a hidden world. Linda Hamilton brought strength to Catherine, while Ron Perlman, under layers of prosthetics, gave Vincent a quiet, poetic soul. Their love was forbidden, impossible, and entirely real. The show combined crime drama with fantasy, romance with action. It should not have worked, but it did. It spoke to something deep in its audience, a longing for connection in a world that felt increasingly cold. The underground world Vincent lived in was not just a fantasy setting, it was a metaphor for safety, for community, for a different kind of beauty. The show whispered that love could exist without conditions, without judgment, even without surface-level attraction. It did not mock emotion. It embraced it like something sacred. And in doing so, it gave viewers permission to believe in gentleness, even in a brutal world. Beauty and the Beast earned a devoted fan base, one that continues to cherish the show today. But in the mainstream, it has faded. Newer generations barely know it existed, and that is a shame, because for all its melodrama and mythical flourishes, it was sincere. It believed in love without irony. It dared to show vulnerability in a genre that often avoided it. There was no script, no set, no characters, just kids being kids. Bug Juice was one of the first reality series made for younger viewers, and it hit like a warm, unfiltered memory of summer that never fully leaves you. Set at real American summer camps, it followed groups of preteens and teens through weeks of friendship, homesickness, awkward crushes, personal growth, and emotional firsts. There were no plot twists, just real life, captured in all its messy honesty. You saw kids cry when they missed home. You saw them celebrate small victories. You saw them form bonds that felt bigger than the campgrounds they occupied. Bug Juice was not trying to entertain, it was trying to reflect. And in doing so, it did something more powerful. It made its audience feel less alone. It captured the exact moment when innocence starts to fracture, but wonder still holds on. There was beauty in the awkward silences, the shy glances, and the honest confessions of kids just beginning to understand themselves. For kids watching at home, these campers were mirrors. They were the same age. They had the same fears, the same jokes, the same hopes. The camera did not glamorize them, it simply followed them. That simplicity was its strength. It captured something so ephemeral, what it means to be on the edge of growing up, just for a moment. The show ended without ceremony, its cast scattered, its legacy quietly stored in the minds of a generation that still remembers how the campfire felt. In a media world obsessed with fiction, Bug Juice told a small, beautiful truth. Sometimes the most unforgettable stories are the real ones. Charles Herbert was not just a child actor, he was the child actor of the 1950s. With over 40 feature films and dozens of television appearances before the age of 16, he was a household name at a time when television was still earning its place in the American living room. Audiences adored him. Studios wanted more of him. And like so many before and after, Charles gave the world every bit of himself before he was old enough to realize what that meant. But the applause that lifted him up became the silence that swallowed him. As he grew older, the roles dried up. His voice changed, his face matured, and suddenly the golden boy of the silver screen was just another forgotten teenager. The transition from child star to adult actor is a narrow bridge few can cross, and Charles slipped through the cracks. The phone stopped ringing. The fan letters stopped coming. The boy who had once earned more than his own parents now found himself struggling to survive. He spoke, later in life, with haunting honesty about the pain of growing up in the spotlight, about being used, managed, and then left behind. He battled addiction, faced poverty, and for years, he vanished from the public eye. But unlike many who disappear in silence, Charles eventually came back, not to act, but to tell his story, to warn others. He never blamed the audience. He never lashed out at the industry. He simply revealed the truth, that childhood is not a commodity. And fame, especially when given to a child, is never a gift without cost. Charles Herbert did not just disappear. He faded, slowly, quietly, and with more grace than the world ever gave him. Some shows did not just reflect youth, they shaped it. California Dreams was a sun-soaked, surfside time capsule of teenage life in the early 1990s. It followed a group of high school friends who formed a band, chasing stardom while juggling friendship, heartbreak, homework, and everything in between. The setting was always golden, the skies always blue, but the emotions hit deep. Every episode felt like a page out of a diary someone forgot to lock. Behind the catchy guitar riffs and pop lyrics, this was a show about change, about how friendships bend under pressure, how dreams evolve, and how growing up always means leaving something behind. The characters, from Jake's cool loner persona to Tiffany's grounded kindness, were more than tropes. They were reflections of us. They made mistakes, chased the wrong people, fought over the wrong things, and then picked up the pieces, sometimes with a song, sometimes with silence. California Dreams offered a vision of youth that was both dreamy and devastating. It made you want to learn guitar. It made you want to call your friends. It made you wonder if high school was really just a stage for a story you might not fully appreciate until it is over. The show ended after 4 years, not with a bang, but a quiet fade. It was gone before most people realized how much it mattered. Now it lives as a soft echo from the corner of nostalgia, waiting for someone to remember how it felt to watch young people sing their hearts out while the tide rolled in behind them. Which of these flops do you remember or wish you didn't? Tell us below, tap like, and subscribe for more Lost Legends.